One.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK. Today, we have a very interesting guest, and I think a very interesting topic, which may shift as we're going along here because we've been sort of discussing it. The topic today is package deals in science, and I think we may be also touching on the politicization of science as well. And with me is a very special guest, Meghann Ribbens, and she is a PhD in molecular biology. Ooh, so you have a far bigger brain than I. So you're probably going to be taking this, most of this topic. I'll just be asking questions and learning. Where do we begin with a topic this huge? I think everybody on the left and right can sort of relate to the idea that science seems to be contaminated now.
It's good fun. I think probably the place to start is my motivation. And I don't want to speak for your motivation. My motivation is that based on what I've seen, and I've been in the biotech industry for 10 years now, even in the best case scenario, politicization of science means that you're telling some very sick kids that they don't matter, and really threatening their health. So let me, now that I've motivated this a little bit, let me just say a little bit about my background. I got my bachelor's in biochemistry at UCLA when I was 20. I got my PhD from the crosstown rival USC when I was somewhat older than 20. And like I said, I've been in mostly small startup biotech. Currently, I'm doing gene therapy. I will disclaim that I do not speak for my employer. I don't know, is that enough of a preface? I don't know if you want to chime in.
Well, you also set up a big mystery as to what it's like going to UCLA, a football game, or USC football game. Who do you root for, I wonder?
I wish I could tell you. Because those tickets are incredibly hard to get, and you can imagine being in college and then making less than a bus driver in graduate school, that I sure could not afford those tickets. I mean, even they discounted them quite a bit for students, and even so, we just kind of. What was nice is that we could tailgate, which was fun.
Well, my stepdaughter's a UCLA grad, and her father is a USC guy, so there's a little rivalry in the household. But you set right on, right? You set this up with a huge teaser. Now, I'm very interested in how you come to this conclusion. Politicized science means that they're more or less setting a very sick kid up to, I guess, get sicker and not prosper, not thrive. Why is this?
Yeah. So let me just say that this is an anecdote, so take this for what it's worth. But when I shifted over, so when the lockdown started, it was probably quite different for me than for everyone else, because I was working on COVID diagnostics, and I was actually working with positive samples before the vaccines were available even to me. So I was very, very pandemic facing. After that, for reasons we can get into if you'd like, I shifted over to rare diseases. Now, I say rare because any one of them might only affect 1 in 100,000, just throwing out a number there. But if you accumulate all the rare diseases, about 1 in 10 people have some form of rare disease. Now, the anecdote comes from a friend I was working with for this this company making therapeutics for rare diseases. He said he'd been working at a company where they were trying to address Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which affects children pretty much as soon as they're born. For various reasons, their muscles don't develop properly, and it just gets worse. And they probably don't make it very long. And during the lockdowns, he was trying to get basic supplies like pipette tips. Now, a lot of what we molecular biologists do involves moving. I mean, it sounds really exciting, but really involves moving very small volumes of liquid and very small distances. So what you need more than anything else is something that does that well. If you can't get the pipettes, which you sure couldn't in COVID, not for any money, and the tips, you can't do your job. And that was part of the problem when I was developing these diagnostics, doing the tech transfer. But for his company, it was worse, because what he told me was that due to Project Warp Speed, which has a lot of merit, right? The idea was that we kind of remove some of these barriers to safety, efficacy, and then production, all of which are non-trivial for a vaccine as well as anything else. But it also meant that the companies most likely to get that vaccine into our hands, and I sure benefited from them myself, get priority over supplies. So that's where I say, and I think there's reason to believe that even though this, Project Warp Speed was well motivated, I think it was doing what needed to be done in terms of making the vaccines available faster. It still meant that for this company that was trying to heal kids with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and other companies like them, they couldn't get the supplies because Moderna gets them first. And as devastating as the pandemic has been, I don't think these kids count any less. They're not less important to their families, to their friends, to themselves. So I think that should have been, I think it was incredibly well intentioned. And I think it should have been up to the market to say, you know what, there are some families who are going to move heaven and earth to make these therapies available to their kids before it's too late.
So when we're talking about politicization of science here, try to say that 5 times fast, guys. We're talking about the government prioritizing certain therapies and treatments over everything else and locking out the market on those things and shutting out people who become victims then of that government focus because they aren't being treated for the things that they need to be treated. I mean, I remember this sort of being an issue in the 80s with HIV, which affected, a very small but politically powerful constituency who were very vocal about, and very concerned, and in some respects rightfully concerned about being persecuted because the disease was contained in that, with almost exclusively within that community. But it reprioritized lots of research towards one thing, funneled tons of money, politically generated money, into one area, away from heart disease and cancer, which kills hundreds of thousands of people a year, millions of people a year. And that's scary. But when I'm thinking of politicization of science, I'm not only thinking about how the government reprioritizes things for us and locks people out, who become victims and often unheard victims. I'm really glad that you were a voice for people with that disease, because I think they should not be in that position. I also think of results and analysis being filtered through a political lens in such a way that we don't get the proper information about what the heck is going on and can't make the proper choices for ourselves. What do you think of that with respect to the way science is now evolving, so that information itself is being tainted and portrayed in a particular way so that certain political powers will be satisfied?
I think there's a lot packed into your question. But it sounds like what you're saying is that science involves a series of steps that all has to, go well and into order to be successful. We typically think of Francis Bacon laying down the scientific method as observation, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, conclusion. And you're right, that can go wrong at any or all of those steps. And to be honest, I don't think that's all about politicization either. I think there's a real crisis of epistemology in science. But in as much as politics has a lot to say about what observation is going to fund, whether or not you want to be hypothesis driven in your research at all, um, what you make of the experimental results and what you report, all of that is someone interprets it as good or bad for their political campaign. To be honest, like it's funny. I being in small startups, I have to talk to business people, and let me just say that I cannot do what they do, like not even close, and I don't want to. I don't know why not everybody is a molecular biologist, but thank goodness there are people who want to do things like acting and business, you know what I mean? So I can do my thing. And yet when I talk to them, they tend to think of hypotheses as like results A, we accept it, results B, we reject it. And what I end up with is usually result 2 pi r, right? And they're like, well, we can't do anything with this. I'm like, well, no, not immediately, but this is probably telling us something really interesting and valuable that we just never even considered. And imagine having that conversation with a politician. I'm like, I wouldn't want to be in the room when that. Does that kind of touch on what you were asking?
It does, but one of the subtitles, I think, of the piece, at least when I got the email, is about sort of the anti-vax movement and people being suspicious of the vaccine for the COVID issue. I happen to know a number of people who refuse to get the vaccine. Full disclosure, I have 5 shots, so I'm not one of those. And I've tried to convince some of these folks that it's not, the vaccine isn't what they think it is. But there's it's not just that the misinformation is out there, but it's the government's concerted effort with social media to repress any opposition information that makes people highly suspicious of a vaccine that could in fact be legitimate. It even makes me wonder, is it? I mean, I've had COVID twice and I have 5 shots. I mean, how do we, what can we do? How can we get past this other than completely repairing science and making it, as you said, this sort of step-by-step truth-driven enterprise the way it used to be, as opposed to placating, political interest?
That is an excellent question, and it's something that's been haunting me for years. So how to start? I mean, yeah, I don't know if you saw these hashtags back when the vaccines first came out. It said hashtag I believe in science, and that to me was more offensive than someone saying I'm not going to get the vaccine. You know what I mean? Like that's a personal choice, and I can tell you just how cool the vaccine technology is, and like all the things you had to do to get that to work. It was very non-trivial, and yeah, it's just amazing. There's not even like the slightest bit of virus in these vaccine, which, like, think how far we've come, right? Like with smallpox, you either got like on purpose infected yourself with cowpox, or maybe just a little bit of the actual smallpox, because that meant that your risk of dying was 2% instead of on the order of, I think, 40% if you got actual smallpox.
This is a massively huge bit of information for me that I didn't even consider, and I think people watching it or listening to this at any time would be amazed by. Yes, you had to be infected with the virus or the bug so that your body could build immunity, and this is a completely different type of therapy that saves you from that risk.
It's just, and again, I am not I am not an immunologist, to take this for what it's worth, but like the development of vaccines over the last couple of centuries has just been incredible. Just, I go on and on. But what you were asking really is, how do we deal with this? And I think you sort of hinted at it, is that I don't think there's a shortcut. And so I'll reference something that Lisa Van Dam said. At one point, she's got these series of videos on the Van Dam Academy website where she's talking about teaching children science. And she says, when I was taught science, I cracked open the book, and the first thing you saw was this diagram of a cell with mitochondria and a nucleus and And she's like, and it meant nothing to me. And I was like, wait, is that wrong? It didn't occur to me that I was so used to being taught that way that, like, a kid who sees that for the first time has nothing to go on. They don't know how that was discovered, why anyone even bothered. Like, why, like, science in general is about, like, risking starvation in the moment in order to, like, make the observation so that, the rest of us benefit throughout time. That's incredible. Fortunately, like, I normally get to eat, so that's good. Because I don't do good science when I'm hungry. But so what I'm getting at is that when people are taught science as just like, here, I'm handing you these 3 laws of Newtonian physics. So just, do with that what you will, with no context of how that came about, like the amazing way this was discovered. Plug for ARU. There's a class that actually developed how we got to Newtonian physics. So
Wow.
cool. Yeah. I'm taking it now. It's delightful. But if we just kind of hand these facts without context, they mean nothing. And people think that science is just this dogma. You know what I mean? And they don't know how to interpret the way we find things out. So they can't suss for themselves whether the vaccine is a good idea for them, or what actually went into making it, which is an incredibly cool story. So I think it starts with very early education, and as frustrating as it is to say that, I don't think there's a way around it. I don't think there's a shortcut. I really sympathize with people who are suspicious of the vaccine, since we've been telling people that we're going to cure cancer for decades. Now, decades of research has happened, and a lot of it really good. But cancer is not one disease. There is at least one type of cancer for every type of cell in your body. You have trillions of cells. There are lots of different kinds of cancer, and each one of them is a unique disease. They share one common feature, but that's about all they have in common. And yet people were led to expect, and I don't think, given the way it was explained, they were wrong to expect a cure for cancer and a cure for AIDS.
And the conspiracy theories abound about, pharmaceutical companies withholding actual cures because there's no money in it. Sorry, folks, there's lots of money in curing cancer. Okay, cancer is a cell that's in everybody's body. There's cancer everywhere. You can tell me because you're the biologist, but you have these natural killer cells and your immune system that fights this stuff off. It will be a perennial issue for us. So the pharmaceutical companies are interested in solving the problem, even though people the conspiracy theorists will say, no, it's the chemotherapy, it's all this other stuff, there's massive industries that they would rather support, and the medications for that, as opposed to finding the cure for cancer. Nonsense. Anyway,
yeah, I have actually had someone ask me, does the cure for cancer exist? And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I said, I don't know if you think I'm like, did I accidentally wear my top hat and twirl my evil mustache today? Because if I had the cure for cancer, both of my parents have had it. I would sure be giving it to them. Not many molecular biologists are friendless orphans. I'm deeply flawed as a human being, but I like to think I'm not so evil that if I had this incredible, beneficent gift of healing so many people of this wretched disease, that I would withhold it for any reason. And by the way, if I had a cure for any cancer, I would have 100% market share, especially if it was even slightly more palatable than chemotherapy. Just throwing that out there.
For sure. And you said something about contextualizing education. I mean, I noticed this in my sort of specialty is American history. And when my stepdaughter was going to middle school, they taught history in a way that did not integrate facts. They were just disparate facts that were unrelated to each other. You studied Neolithic times one week, European colonialism the next week, and then modern day, the week after, and there was no concept of what ideas transformed one age to the next, or what makes them different from each other and unique, and so there was no sense of human progress. And likewise, when you say that, giving kids facts and telling them that that's science, it sort of cements in their minds that it's dogma as opposed to a process of thought and arriving at a conclusion that took lots of time. It took lots of time to come up with this concept of the scientific method and this form of disproof and validation that we need in order to move forward. And the people who are saying, I believe in science, are equally engaged in that idea that it's dogma. It's dogma. I'm believing in this religion, when it's not that at all.
Yeah. So I do these experiments with my daughter, not on my daughter, but with my daughter. And we started doing these when she was 3 or 4, where and this was right around the lockdown. That you've heard of social distancing. What does that mean? Why do we do it? And so what we did was we took little pieces of bread with milk on them and we heated them up to sterilize them. I didn't tell her why we were doing it, but then we opened them up. We set one of them that was 1 foot away and 2 feet away and 4 feet away and 6 feet away. And I said, okay, sneeze. And we did. And then we just closed them up and we had a control where we just kept it closed the whole time. And we saw what grew, and it got smelly and nasty. And it was a beautiful, it was a beautiful experiment to show why we social distance, beyond 6 feet. It's hard to get those sneeze germs. And, within a year, I was showing her how to turn invisible things visible and visible things invisible. It's actual magic, but science magic.
I think that's fantastic. You're a teacher.
I'm a very proud mommy of a very precocious girl. But
Van Damme level of teaching.
Oh no. Thank you. That's very kind, but I do not deserve that kind of praise. But I really sympathize with you because I can do this for biology and maybe physics, but I sure can't do it for history. I know as much as your daughter was taught, which is probably worse than nothing. So yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's a problem probably in every field, and I only know it in science because I see it every day.
Indeed. I mean, so if the solution is, so we've sort of arrived at a solution. The solution is changing the education system so they actually integrate information in such a way that people understand what a scientific phenomenon is. They not only they understand the phenomenon, where it came from and why it came to be. Because nowadays, I feel, talking about the politicization of science, even pressing it into another realm here, you see kids who are terrified of dying in 12 years because the Earth is going to die from global warming, but they have no idea. They couldn't talk to you about atmospheric conditions. They couldn't talk to you about physics. They couldn't talk to you about chemistry. They couldn't talk to you about photosynthesis. They can't talk to you about the actual scientific principles underlying the ideas or the prognosis that we're going to die. But they're just injected with this terror, this fear, and
my daughter, who is 7, is hearing this kind of. I mean, it's not quite, it's not painted quite so bleakly, but she was so worried. I was like, sweetheart, we are going to talk about this. We are going to do a lot of experiments. You are 7. It is not appropriate to investigate this now. Let's work on how the stars move. Let's work on the rotation of figuring out what the shape of the Earth is, and you know what I mean. Let's start with that. We'll go from there.
Sure. I mean, it's a form of terrorism to do that to a child who doesn't have the capacity to integrate all of those principles and understand what it all means from their own point of view. They can only take what somebody's posited in them and accept that as the facts and go from there.
Yeah, I know you've got a hard start, but what's equally troubling to me, and I'm curious if you had the same experience. Um, I'll ask kids, "Why are you learning this right now?" And it's like they can't even entertain the possibility of such a question. I'm learning right now because that's what they're teaching, but not why anyone ever bothered to discover this. Like, and there are life and death reasons why they need to know this stuff. Um, that should definitely be some part of the motivation of the student.
Oh, indeed. So we've uncovered the fact that we need a better education system so that kids aren't just taught dogmas or political ideologies in the form of science. And what else do you think needs to change? Because that's a generations long, I think, phenomenon, changing the education system. What can we do beyond that? And then maybe more immediately to start having respect for science, qua science, as opposed to as an arm of the government telling us what it wants to do to us.
Well, in the immediate term, listeners should definitely super chat to make sure that Razi and Irene and Daniel aren't surviving on top ramen and American beer. Nobody wants that. Um, beyond that, Mark, to be serious, I don't know. I think you're right. I think it starts with education, and it starts very early in education, and I don't think there are any shortcuts. Um, I don't know. Do you have any ideas? Because if there were shortcuts, I would love to have them.
The political establishment right now is sort of in such they're aligned in such a way as to make any sensible talk really impossible. It can't get past the noise, right? I mean, the left has sort of co-opted the mantle of science and they're using the mantle of science and scientific consensus across the board, not just with climate change, but lots of other things, to impose its version of utopia on the rest of us. And the right, in some respects, rightfully sees that it's lies. It's many of it's based on nonsense. It's politically motivated, and are starting to distrust intellectuality, science, reason, individualism. They're starting to reject the things that the left are claiming that they stand for. And we're the objectivists in the background saying, well, they're both wrong. Now let's go down this other path. Science is good. It's very good. It's what's taken us out of the cave. So let's keep respecting that. But more than anything, respecting the method that took us there, which isn't about so much the result as the method, the attention to logic, the attention to weeding out contradictions, the attention to finding what's true. That's what we need.
And you said science is good, and I will amend that. Like, I am absolutely in love with science, and I don't remember a time when I wasn't. That being said, good science is good. And there's a whole lot of bad science out there. It's funny when Razi first pitched the idea of package deals, I thought, well, okay, I've seen senior PhDs do stuff like, instead of isolating variables, they would increase both variables together and say, aha, we see an effect when you increase both. It's obviously this one, which is exactly the same as saying, we have this person with an iron deficiency. We're going to give them a steak sandwich. Wow, they seem to feel better. It's obviously the bread. So that happens.
Well, I mean, that's changing the epistemology, the honesty of people. I mean, do you think a grant system or the government is very much engaged in giving out money to scientists? Do you think it affects the information that people are willing to put out there, right? It feels like science is now sort of pressing for that grant, pressing for that thing that they want, and they're excluding the truth. The truth is dying in the process.
To be honest, I don't know, like that case, I don't know how much that is the machinations of politicians and how much of that is the failure of modern philosophers, with one notable exception.
Correct.
Yeah. So the answer is probably a little bit of both.
Well,
Um,
maybe they're able to get away with it and pass it off as pass it off as it being legitimate as opposed to a grift, because the philosophers have so disarmed people that they can't see through it.
well, and I don't know that, I mean, at least in this case, I don't think it was like consciously evil. There sure was conscious evil there, but there's incompetence too.
Right.
And not through, frankly, probably not through their fault. Probably because someone in their educational process did them an incredible disservice.
Copy that. Hey, we have a super chat from Michael Sanders for $9.99. Thanks, Michael. Mystics and skeptics often use physics as a foxhole to hide in order to launch attacks against reason. I have noticed this, by the way. What is proper objectivist interpretation of quantum mechanics? Now, that is a question for a philosopher of science. I'm not a philosopher of science. Are you?
Nor am I. No,
Right.
and I'm also not a physicist. So yeah, I wish I had an answer, because I love physics, even though it's not my specialty. I don't. I wish I did.
I want to say I think Binswanger has some probably an interesting point about it, and I don't want to misquote him, but I know he was a scientist before he became a philosopher, and maybe even in the physical sciences like physics. So he has a very keen sense of philosophy's place and its orientation to this thing we call quantum physics, which is prepared to violate all kinds of laws of identity, and it's supposedly okay. So I know that we have issues with it. I'm not clear about specifically what they are. At least I'm not prepared to talk about them in a way that would make me sound cogent. That's for sure. Apollo Zeus for £2. Views on BDNF.
I might proffer them if I knew if that was.
Yeah, I don't know what BDNF is. Apollo Zeus, can you clarify? And then Apollo Zeus for another £2. Latest news on myostatin. Ooh, myostatin. Now that sounds interesting. Do you know anything about
that? That I also don't know about. So as I've heard, and again, I'm not a cardiologist. I mean, I think I mentioned before the show started that I'm working with viruses of viruses, where you can fit like a billion trillion of them in a tiny little droplet. They're that tiny. So like human body size is way too big a scale for me. As I understand it relates to I have totally forgotten. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a complete blank. I'm so sorry.
So let me just cut in here. Brain-derived neurotropic factor equals BDNF. Brain-derived.
Oh, thank you. No, that's really fair. And again, I'm not a neurobiologist either, so I have no opinion. I don't know. Do you know anything about it?
I don't know anything about it, but it sounds interesting, and I wish I did. I do have a sort of a relationship to statins because I had a heart issue recently, and I actually had a type of procedure done that was experimental, not in Europe, but in the United States. And the FDA is still putting us through trials, which they'll probably do for another 10 or 15 years. And I don't know how many people will die in the meantime, but that's the way the FDA works. But speaking of amazing technology, I'll just go off on this little divergence for a little bit. They wheeled me into an operating room with computer screens the size of plasma TVs, 5 of them. They put me on a magnetic bed, and they could read my heart and see my heart and map it out, its electrical system completely. And just putting 2 little sensors down my neck and into my groin area were able to fix the electrical system of my heart with a new type of technology that doesn't damage the heart muscle the way former radio bursts did. So, man, science has saved my life and got me back on track. I love science. I don't have faith in it. I don't believe in it. I think it is a phenomenal approach to life. It makes us thrive, and we should embrace it and get politics out of it. We're not sure how to do that, you and I, in the short term. In the long term, I think we should shun the folks who, to some degree, who are rejecting science entirely because they're rejecting a political ideology, hopefully not science itself. Any final words before we go off into the wild blue yonder, you and I?
Well, I'm glad that you're feeling so much better and that you seem to be flourishing. That's what we're here to do. Like I said, we're here to help. In my company, we're here to help really sick kids. That's what we want to do. I'm lucky enough to have a very healthy daughter. I can't imagine being a parent and faced with a child who has a devastating heritable disease. And I hope eventually we can make that pain go away like it never existed. Yeah, so it was really nice to meet you, Mark, and thank you so much for that.
And if you're allowed to do your work without politicians getting into the room and interfering with your results, that will happen. I know that for sure. I just have a quick announcement here. HBTV is on tonight, 9 p.m. UK time. It's Ask Me Anything. Ask Harry Binswanger anything. You want to take advantage of that if you can, folks. Well, it was an interesting chat with you, Meghann. I really appreciate you being here, folks. Join us tomorrow for the Daily Objective as well. Don't know what the topic is, but that doesn't matter. It's always stimulating and fun. Until then, peace out, my friends.
Cheers.